This government values self-reliance and independence for every single resident of this great province. Well, you know, I always feel bad doing this. It's really a sad thing when a weak piece of rhetoric gets beat up by a muscle-bound group of facts, but here it comes. I find it really interesting to listen to the debate on education, being a former school trustee, because I had the opportunity to serve as a school trustee under both an NDP government and then a BC Liberal government. There were some distinct differences. In terms of the BC Liberal government's funding, guess what? School districts were able to count on a time when they were going to get their money. They knew ahead of time how much money they were going to get, and it actually stayed stable from year to year. What happened under the NDP? It was a guessing game. Not only did districts never know how much they were going to get, but I do not believe, and I checked back about as far as I had time for, I don't believe there was a single year when the NDP were in government when they provided the education funding announcement on time. That's a pretty sorry record, Madam Speaker.
Shame.
But you know, the other thing they like to talk about is how we've exceeded expectations in this budget update around the corporate income tax reduction. And I'm really happy to hear them talking about exceeding expectations. I know it's not something they like to talk about a lot, because certainly the NDP government had a bit of difficulty exceeding and, in fact, even meeting expectations. Year after year, they were late announcing the school district funding. In 8 years, they issued 5 debt management plans, and they missed the mark on every single one. Oh, but you know what? You know what? There was one area where they were exceptionally good at exceeding expectations. Major infrastructure and capital projects routinely exceeded budgeted expectations. But, Madam Speaker, that was the dark decade of the 90s, and fortunately we've moved on to the 21st century. Closing note, Mr. Speaker. One of the other things that's really intrigued me over the last while is the NDP's fascination with the fact that they've been elected as a strong opposition. I don't question that at all. You know, I think we've returned to what is really a traditional structure in the House, and certainly the public voted for a strong opposition. But, Mr. Speaker, I think it's fair to remind them that at the end of the day, the people of British Columbia elected a BC Liberal government, and there's a reason they did that. Mr. Speaker, they elected a BC Liberal government because they wanted to vote for vision and for leadership. They voted to keep our economy going strong, and they voted for a future of opportunity and prosperity for all British Columbians. That's what this September budget update gets us closer to, and that's what this BC Liberal government is going to deliver over the next 4 years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we have before us a motion that proves that once again we have an opposition in search of a position, whether it's gateway or MLA compensation or now election finance. The idea is that we ought to study everything further, wait till someone else makes nice around a committee table, and then we'll make a decision. The fact of the matter is, there is nothing wrong or intrinsically evil about a partisan discussion. It is one of the valued parts of our Westminster democracy. I grew up in a home where my parents used to love to read famous historical figures, famous political figures, and debate the issues around the dinner table. And one of the things my father has hammered home to me is that there's nothing to apologize for in saying that you have a particular position. And it would be much more useful to have an opposition who brought forward a firm position saying, here are the actions, the amendments, the precise ways in which we would like to address election financing reform or whatever other reforms in the Elections Act that you can find. And then we could have a direct debate and discussion about those things. But, you know, it takes a certain amount of courage to get out there and take a strong position rather than simply back off and say, oh, we shouldn't be partisan. Oh, we shouldn't bring our ideologies here. Oh, we shouldn't have this open discussion in a firm way. The reality is we're elected to do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think part of the reason people get jaded about politicians and the role that they play is that politicians get up and say, well, you know, I'm not bringing any ideology to this, and I'm not bringing any position to this, you know, I just want to discuss it. The public knows that's fundamentally untrue, and they expect more from us than that.
I recognize the member from Lightwood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. throne speech because it does something in politics that I think has been missing for decades. It continues to be missed. Time after time when there are important issues going on, I find that the highest level of political debate that I could uncover in British Columbia is unfortunately often not in this House, not in council chambers, not in school districts, but at the local Tim Hortons, at the Ethical Addictions coffee shop in Langley, at the Starbucks, and there's a reason why. Because in places like that, people are allowed to ask the questions that they want. They're allowed to ask questions about, you know what, I don't understand why the government doesn't do this about healthcare. And people can have a good old discussion about it. Or, you know what, I don't understand why the government teaches this in the education system. I don't get that. And they can ask it without the leader of the opposition jumping up, pointing her finger at them and saying, you're the one with the secret plan to privatize healthcare.
The problem, Madam Speaker, isn't that the principles of the Canada Health Act are undefined. The problem is that the government ignores those principles. The government has begun to use the word innovation in reference to health care, but as we all saw just last week with the government's knee and hip replacement scheme, innovation is just code word for more privatization.
Unfortunately, that's not going to get you the right answers. All that's going to get you is more political dogma. I was fascinated to learn today that along with the long list of usual NDP mantras that I've been keeping, there's a few that, spill out now and again, like mean-spirited, for-profit, working people. One of my favorite is average British Columbians. I love that one because when you talk about undefined terms, that's a real good one. All I've been able to gather in this House is that average British Columbians must not refer to anybody outside of the NDP caucus, because certainly, if you're not part of agreeing with that, you're not average. If you're a BC Liberal, you're not an average British Columbian. But I was really surprised today to hear that the word rhetoric is now a piece of rhetoric. That's the way it was used today. Instead of getting at the argument and the debate around the questions, we have the leader of the opposition saying, well, it's time to stop the rhetoric. I think I actually counted about 20 times today when that phrase was used. It's time to stop the rhetoric. Of course, then I'm going to proceed to go into a lot of rhetoric. Didn't stop her. But it's time to stop the rhetoric. Well, down to the opposition not wanting to discuss the issues. They'd rather talk about portraying people in a nasty light. I read today some of the quotes that pointed to saying that the Premier doesn't like the Canada Health Act. Oh, he really doesn't like the Canada Health Act. In fact, I'm sure he gets up every morning and thinks, oh my gosh, that Canada Health Act, I really don't like that. It's preposterous. The Premier doesn't like the Canada Health Act. In fact, he hates it so much he's going to enshrine it in legislation. And he's actually going to find out what it means and how we might make it work. Yeah, I'm sure. He must really just like that Canada Health Act. Instead of getting down to complaining or attacking people based on, whether the Premier likes the Canada Health Act or not, or whether the Premier is secretly plotting to implement user fees, or, oh my goodness, using code words like sustainability to couch privatization plans. Let's get out of that. That's the old, come on, get real. Nobody buys that stuff anymore. Let's not have that go back to, oh, well, I'd love to support it, but you guys are secretly privatizing. That's a code word. Or I'd love to support you, but, you really don't like the Canada Health Act, and by the way, you're mean-spirited, and you really don't speak to average British Columbians because you're out of touch. I mean, you want to cut rhetoric with a knife? That's pretty good. Let's be open about it. And to finish, Madam Speaker, that's the challenge I lay out. I don't know if there's ever been a double dog here in the House, but that's mine. Come out, stand up about it, and say we are as ready as you are as government to move forward on whatever answers we get, whether they fit with our political dogma or not, because that's leadership, that's inspiration, and that's the only way that we're going to solve these challenges for our province and that we're going to move forward. That's what we're ready to do. We're ready for you to come along with us. Let's see if you have the guts to do it.